Evelick Castle stands high on the braes of the Carse of Gowrie, between Perth and Dundee. The Carse is now prime agricultural land, with many acres given to growing soft fruit, like strawberries and raspberries. But at one time, this was marshland and floodplain. This is why many of the older villages in the Carse cling to the foot of the Sidlaw Hills on the higher ground. The castle sits high up, guarding the pass between the Carse and Strathmoor. The castle was built sometime in the 16th century and is a L-plan castle, shaped like the letter L. L and Z-plan castles are common throughout Scotland, were more defensive towers than anything else, not meant to withstand long drawn-out sieges, but attacks by lightly armed raiders. Historic Environment Scotland, their website on the castle, states that there is an unusually high number of gun loops which pierce the walls, one for every window. It is clear the castle owners took defence very seriously. Evelick Castle now is a ruin, standing in a farm. It is in a dangerous, dilapidated state, and there is no access to the interior, but the castle has known life, death, happy times and sad. Its rooms were once warmed by roaring fires. Laughter would have echoed round these empty chambers, and grim-faced men would have talked of war and feud in the areas where rooks now nest. The powerful Lindsays called this castle home, a clan which was often warlike and troublesome, and one which I am connected to. The chief of the Lindsays was the Earl of Crawford, and at birth I was named Gary Crawford. In the middle of the 1600s, William Lindsay of Leckaway inherited the castle. When he died, his elder brother took the castle and lands, and from then on the family were known as the Lindsays of Evelick. In 1666, Alexander Lindsay of Evelick married, and this union produced 2 sons. But sadly, not long after this marriage, Alexander's first wife died. He went on to marry again to Rachel Douglas, a widow, who had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son. In 1680, Alexander returned to the castle with his new wife and stepchildren. There was a massive feast and party put on, as the Lindsays welcomed their new arrivals. James, Rachel's son, was about the same age as Thomas, Alexander's oldest boy, from his first marriage, and both seemed to get on very well. But James held a deep resentment over Thomas, who would inherit the castle and lands on his father's death. This resentment turned slowly and steadily into a deep-rooted hatred for young Master Lindsay. Although James was well looked after in his stepfather's will, he would inherit a large sum of money. One day in 1682, Thomas and James went for a walk in the hills around the castle. On the way down a steep and wooded ravine, James suddenly pulled out a knife and attacked his stepbrother, repeatedly stabbing him in the chest. Thomas fought bravely, and the 2 men grappled and fought, falling down a steep slope. They both ended in a burn. Thomas, wounded and losing blood, was getting weaker. James sprung to his feet and started to kick and stamp on Thomas's head and face. Then he picked up a large river boulder. Then, lifting it high, he brought it crashing down on the man lying in the water. With a sickening noise, it hit Thomas on the face and ended the young man's life in the most horrific way.
Explore Castle Menzies after dark.
Is it really haunted?
Is it really haunted?
Book now to find out.
If you dare.
James wiped the blood from the blade of the knife and ran towards the castle. He soon reached Evelick and rushed in, shouting for help. A crowd of servants and family members quickly gathered round and listened in horror as James told of finding Thomas Lindsay dead and drowned in the burn, murdered by some unknown assailant. A large party of armed men, led by Alexander Lindsay, ran to the burn and found Thomas lying dead in the water. His body was lifted and taken back to the castle amid scenes of grief and sorrow. Men were sent round the area to hunt for this killer. James was interrogated, by his stepfather, and he insisted on the truth of his story. Even when asked to place his hand on the corpse, James did so and stuck to his version of events. It was an ancient belief that if a murderer or killer touched the corpse of his or her victim, blood would flow from the body and give away the murderer. Rachel pleaded with her son to tell the truth. This gives the impression he was not believed. James suddenly broke down and confessed, telling his mother the whole account. James was taken to Perth and charged with the murder of Thomas Lindsay. When the charge was formally read out, James changed his mind and denied killing his stepbrother, stating again that he found Thomas mortally wounded. James said he tried to lift Thomas, and while doing so, fell on him, getting his brother's blood on his clothing. Over the next few days, his mother and stepfather pleaded with James to admit his guilt. Once again, James broke down and confessed. Rachel Douglas did not try and protect her son, writing to a relation that she desired justice to be done. This shows the disgust she must have felt at her son. He'd killed the eldest son of her husband, and she knew she and her children had been welcomed into the Evelick household with open arms. James was taken to Edinburgh and locked in the city's toll booth. James was tried for the murder of Thomas on the 11th of July 1682 and pled guilty, and was sentenced to be beheaded at the cross on Friday the 4th of August. James then made another confession. He said that while in Edinburgh in January he'd set fire to the premises of one of the city's lawyers. Arson at this time was treason, and people found guilty of treason could have their land and assets seized. The Lord Advocate, Sir George Mackenzie, or Bloody Mackenzie as he's often referred to, and the Marquis of Douglas wanted to get their hands on the money James was due to inherit. The lawmen wanted to go ahead with this case of treason. James received a state of execution as a possibility of another trial was looked into. On the 9th of August, James came before the Lords of Justiciary, where he retracted his confession to fire raising. Much to Mackenzie's disgust, it was decided that James was already sentenced to death and they would not try and convict him of treason. James Douglas was beheaded at the Cross of Edinburgh on the 16th of August by a machine called the Maiden. This early guillotine was copied from one in Halifax in England and was used in Scotland until 1710. It can still be seen in the National Museum of Edinburgh to this day. I hope you enjoyed the story. I'm suffering a little bit from the after effects of a cold, and I can hear it a little bit in my voice, so I hope this didn't put you off, and by the next time you hear me, I'll be back to full fitness. Thank you.